Okay, hello. Hello again. Right, it's me again. Yeah. So, got just under 10 minutes now to try and explain to you that I've got a few things I should probably say. Like the vaccine business is pretty good. It's done a lot of good things. It's eradicated smallpox. It's on the way to eradicating polio. I'm not going to stand in its way. That's for sure. So, what and I suppose we've got to consider there's a lot of pressure from people who would like to go back to work, who would like to go back to school, who would like to put on sporting events, shows of all kinds. And a lot of us are getting pretty fed up of lockdown already. And so, by the powers that be, I kind of pick up on the vibes that some people are putting out, but perhaps are afraid to voice. And it falls to me to either decide to voice it to you or to not bother. So, when I voice it to you, it's kind of like saying the easy thing to do would just be say you want to go back to work and why do you have to do all this lockdown and stuff, and I'm just supposed to turn to you and give you the line that everyone else gives that says the government have given you advice and it's to protect the NHS, and you'd be a fool to go against it because it will upset the NHS, it will upset the doctors, it will upset all kinds of nurses as well, it will upset because there'll be too many people coming. So it's really easy, kids. Do what you're told. Adults, do what you're told. Old people, do what you're told. That's fine. You know, that's the simple position. That's the starting position. And I suppose what I'm really trying to say, if you didn't understand it before, is that we all know that there must come a day when this ends. We must see an end in sight. And do we? Some people say they keep giving hints that it could be a couple of weeks, 3 or 4 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, these sorts of things. That we're a few weeks behind Italy, that we'll watch how they flatten their curve, and then they'll allow restrictions to be released a little bit. We've already seen markets opening up in certain parts of Italy again, and people beginning to go back about what they call their normal life. They go about their normal life. We're looking forward to that, of course we are. And everyone understands if we had to do it in the first place, then we've got to keep doing it until the effect, the desirable effect, has been achieved. And of course, there's not a lot of point in stopping it too early. But you've also got to imagine this is kind of like the Prime Minister has more or less put the brakes on the country, but his intention is to ease off the brakes. And then if it gets to be a problem again, he puts the foot back down on the brakes. And if the only mechanism he has is lockdown, then it's on lockdown, off lockdown, on lockdown, off lockdown, on lockdown, and he keeps doing that until the NHS can handle it, and then he releases it until they can't, and then he puts it down again. And he, in some ways, has to anticipate. Like a driver has to learn to anticipate when the cars in front of him are braking, when does he brake? So, in simple terms, all for the lockdown. It should have happened sooner. If it had happened sooner, it would have lasted a lot less time. But it would have involved telling everyone to stop going to work, socialising, turning all the industries off. And because we don't live in a totalitarian regime like China lives in, we're not able to do that very easily. It takes an enormous pressure on somebody like a Prime Minister before they will bring this about and do it. So I wish they'd done it sooner, but they couldn't see a way that they could really listen to the scientists and the medical experts and put that lockdown on when they were told to do it. And we all look back to those days and we remember it, right? And the point is that they said we were in a containment phase, but we moved to a delay phase. In America, that's called the mitigation phase. So my point to you is, if they were 2 weeks behind on things back then, maybe they're still 2 weeks behind now. And what I'm trying to say is that a lot of people's businesses are suffering, and we were just supposed to take that on the chin. And what I'm trying to say is there is a better way. There is another way. And that is that where you have, let's see, you have these curves, right? Everyone talks about flattening the curve. I'm with it. I understood it all along. I understood it before most of you. I've been following this pandemic ever since news was hinted at in December and the beginning of January. Okay, so I am a scientist. I do have scientific credentials. Okay, I have a PhD in medical immunology, microbiology, molecular immunology, whatever you want to call it, because it doesn't really have a simple name because it's such cutting edge science that it doesn't really fit into any one category. This is fun, isn't it? Okay, I got that quite reasonably set up. Now, let's have a look at this top graph. Okay, so this top graph shows what's happening at the moment. And the main point of the graph is to follow this curve as it goes up to here. Okay, so that is where we have, and what they say is that's the infections, right? That's the infections where most people are going to get infected in an infection outbreak. And that then drops off. The curve goes up and then the curve goes down. But inside that is this little curve, okay? And we say in there, that's the little curve, and that one there, and that relates to the people who get really, really sick and then die. I'm going to go over. I know my dinner's going to burn, but I'm going to go over, right? So that's the one we need to flatten. That's the curve we need to flatten. But what they say is, if you flatten the big one, then it stands to reason the small one will flatten as well. Well, that is true. But, you know, if you cut the head off somebody, you kill them, that is true, but it cures the disease because the disease goes away because the person is dead. They no longer have the disease. But in terms of society, in terms of economy, if you crush that big top curve, you're in danger, and the only way to do it is to involves risking the economy and the livelihoods of businesses of millions of people. And let's not forget, these small businesses, you know, small coffee shops are going to be pushed out of business, and the only thing left is going to be the big coffee shops, the Starbucks, the McDonald's. That's all that's going to be left. All you small business keepers are going to go out of business. It's going to be very, very difficult for you to survive. And that applies across the board, whatever I'm talking about. Big business will dominate and you will become an employee. You will no longer have the money and the resources to be able to carry on. And I'm worried about that for you guys. I'm also worried about your children because they, you know, I can go on and produce clever diagrams of what the coronavirus looks like, how it has a crown of proteins, spike proteins on its surface, and how the spike protein links to the ACE protein on the human cells, and that binds and that allows the virus to enter, how would it, this was the virus, wasn't it? It's funny looking at it on the reflection on the, as it were. It's not a reflection, is it, when you look at the camera on the screen? It's the opposite. So this one is the virus, and that is allowed to enter into the cell because it works to bind. It works to bind. The ACE2 receptor binds to the spike protein. Now, if you make antibodies, let's imagine that arm's not there, or another arm that looks like it, antibody comes in blocks, right? But the antibody doesn't actually block like that. It blocks like perhaps some of the antibodies come in and they bind here, and some bind here, and some bind here, and some bind here. And when they bind like that, it makes it impossible for these two to get together. That's great, but they don't always work. If you design a vaccine, if you take a vaccine and you take just this spike protein and you inject that into an animal, then you will get antibodies. But sometimes the animal says, well, I made all of my antibodies to, say this region here, because it was really easy to make them to. And that was all I needed to do to survive. Because when you make the antibody, you're only injecting a spike protein. That doesn't kill the animal. It doesn't risk the animal's health. So the animal makes them wherever it can. If you're able to infect the animal and say, now make me antibodies which cure disease rather than which simply bind, okay, then you will find the ones that come in and the ones that block. They interfere with this happening because they block here or here or here, here, and they block it. You see, the two molecules can't get together because there's something in the middle stopping them sticking, and so they just fall off. Okay, so that's basically what I'm on about, is that vaccines are designed by people, but all they do is they inject something that looks a bit like this, so to speak. Yeah, they don't know. All the people who are designing these vaccines, they're just going to put them into humans. Before they do it, they have to put it into animals like mice and monkeys and things like that. So they're going to do that, and then they're going to find out, do we produce any antibodies, and where do they recognize? We'll do crystallography studies. We'll find out what the crystal structure is. We'll know from the crystal structure what this spike protein really looks like, okay? And from that spike protein, we'll then take individual antibodies, what they're called monoclonal antibodies, and they'll give them long code names, and they'll say, well, this code name 1 binds here, and this code 1 with a different name binds here, and if this one here with a different code name binds here. And with a huge effort, we'll be able to see all the different, what's called epitopes of this spike protein, and we'll say, okay, we know we've got antibodies that pretty much any part you want to refer to. Which ones would be good for blocking? Oh, well, this one here, the one that binds here, we'll have that one, please. So then they'll take this one and they'll try and make it well, hang on, let's see. So the vaccine, when you give it to animals, will produce all kinds of epitopes. So then hopefully when you give it to humans, it will also produce all kinds of epitopes. Yeah, and the antibodies will bind to all different parts. It might work. And I'm quite enthusiastic, like everyone else who works in vaccines. That's why I got into the industry. That's why I was in the business. I haven't totally given up on it, trust me. But what I have got severe concerns about is that it might not work for two reasons. One is this might cause severe health problems. When you inject this stuff, it's called the spike protein will be called the antigen. When you inject that antigen into people, it might cause a reaction. That's what we don't know yet. That's what we're worried about. The other thing is that this spike protein may only produce antibodies to the easy part for it to recognize. It might be all here and here and here. That might be where it finds it easy to bind. And the bits that block, it might find it impossible to bind. So you might get a huge response to here, but that it's completely ineffective, and this still happens. You see? You can see it, can't you? There's a gap there. And that is a problem, and that might happen. Now, if that happens, where are we? Where do we stand? We say, well, we'll have to try a different vaccine, yeah? The other vaccines might all be the same because they're all working on the same idea. Inject some of this, and it will give you something that blocks that. That just gets in the way, you know, interferes, stops it sticking, and therefore it falls off, okay? Now, it's possible I'm far too... I'm taking the worst case scenario far too seriously. So the worst case scenario is that the vaccines that come along try to do this, but by the time they try to block this, sorry, but by the time you get your vaccine and then you have your vaccine and you go back to work and you meet people at work who've got, where are we now? We've got this, some people have got this strain, but some people have also got this strain. Some people have got this strain, some people have got this strain, some people have got this strain. You see, all different strains are going to come out, and that's the S protein, okay? So the S protein might produce variations. Those variations might not stop it binding to the ACE receptor, so you still get ACE receptor binding, but they happen to have changed somewhere. Now, if they've changed somewhere and it doesn't stop binding, binding's still okay to the ACE2, but binding of the antibody is disrupted because antibodies are very, very subtle on how they work. So it's a little bit, I suppose, like jigsaw puzzles. You can have two pieces that fit. They don't not necessarily part of the same picture. Difficult when you ask me about jigsaws and how they fit, because, you know, it's not as simple as that. I wish it was. So I've asked the people who've done the wonderful website called nextstrain.org, and I've asked them to tell me what kind of mutations have you actually seen, because there are thousands. Where are they in the important parts of the spike protein in particular, because they haven't really answered that very well for me yet. So I'm hoping they're going to be able to give me some more information on the spike protein. And so the reason then is that we need to have a rough idea as to whether vaccination will work. Because if it doesn't work, we're at a stage where we've got a virus, and it might even be that in a couple of years' time we decide to take this COVID-19 strain and actually use it to infect our children. The question is, should we be doing it now? And people are up in arms about what I'm saying, because they're saying all the advice is really clear from all the experts that we shouldn't do it. So I would like some better explanation, because I'm showing you the upper graph where people die, and now I'm showing you what happens. What none of them are showing, okay, is what happens next season, please. Okay, because that might go up next time or it might go down. All the experts agree it won't disappear. We're not able to make it disappear. Yeah, so then it brings me to the alternative approach, which I've suggested, and which I believe is being given decent consideration, because part of the model needs to deal with not only next year, but the year after that and the year after that. It could go up and keep going up. It could be worse next year because younger people might get it, and the infectivity might go up, rather than being, at the moment, it's like they say the R value is 2.5, that might go up to 10, who knows? And then it could spread much faster than it did this year. So we've got to do as much as we can this year to put out these fires that are there, but simply flattening the curve and not allowing our children and young and young workers in the society to get this disease and get immunity is very dangerous in terms of what happens next year, next season. Right. Now I've got figure B, okay? So what that says, okay, is that this large peak, if we keep that large peak high, the NHS are panicking and saying no, because the lower peak inside will mean that they're overrun with patients, too many patients. And of course, I don't want that. But the argument seems to be that if school children and young people get this disease, which is in both figures is the really large curve, yeah. The big question is, how do we bring down the small one? Well, it strikes me that it's a bit crude to control it by bringing down the large curve when there is another more subtle way, and that is that all people who risk being hospitalized by this, and let's just say for the sake of argument, that's all the same people who have been advised, recommended by their clinician to get the flu vaccine. If we tell all those people that they must self-isolate for this entire year, okay, with their loved one or two, if they're not vulnerable, it does get complicated. Say you've got two elderly people living together, then they self-isolate and they don't see their family. But their family goes about, their younger family goes about its normal business as per normal, okay? Now, then you've got to decide from the medical experts out there that, first of all, you've got to agree in principle that this actually makes much more sense, partly because look what it does to the economy. The economy there, and your own business, small business people will understand what I'm talking about compared to the economy there, where it takes a nosedive, okay? And the reason that this seems to work is that lives saved is the same, okay? And next year, the bump or the hump or the curve is actually lower because we've already got herd immunity. We've got high herd immunity, whereas here, we're giving up entirely on the concept of herd immunity and just saying we don't want that to play a part. So it's not just a case of relying on whether herd immunity is or is not the right answer. It's about understanding who is at risk and how they are going to contract it. Now, I can see maybe if we had never had lockdown, there would be not enough of us would realize how important what I'm saying is. So it would be a little bit unfair asking all these old people and people who have various diseases who are being advised to get the flu jab to tell them, oh, you need to self-isolate and not have anything to do with this, because most of us wouldn't know what the medical experts were saying. We wouldn't really be able to understand it because we'd never been there ourselves. Well, we've all been there now. We've all experienced this lockdown. We all understand how important it is and why. And if we can now come around to the idea that not only are we going to take the foot off the brake, in other words, the lockdown, but we're going to replace it with things like recommendations that improve social distancing, and mask wearing is a brilliant one because it increases social distance, because coughs and sneezes no longer spread out for 6 meters but are contained to here. So your social distancing has been done, and that has the same effect on the column as this locking ourselves away in lockdown. So you know, people are having a hard time because normally in politics, they've seen it coming. In economics, they've seen it coming. Nowadays, we need pandemic experts, epidemiologists running the country, not economics experts. But we don't have them there. We have economic experts. And this takes, probably 10 years to be able to fully get your head around everything you need to know to understand what I'm saying and why it's important. If you can do it in 5, and if with the help of experts like me explaining it to you, and other people, if they can pick up the message that I'm saying and teach this, at least debate it as a possibility. But who is going on Question Time or any of these in-depth review programs? I saw Professor John Edmund. He did a reasonable job of saying this at the beginning, but he has to come back and he has to keep saying it. And hopefully, if all the elements of what I'm saying weren't incorporated into those models, that they become incorporated into those models, that they extend those models and take them into the next realm of understanding. And it's really important because there's a brilliant essay online by a guy called Charles Eisenstein, which apparently a lot of people have heard of him, whereas nobody's heard of me. And read his essay on what freedoms coronavirus has removed, because you have lost your democratic debating chamber. The House of Commons has gone. You have lost your right to go out freely about your business. You've lost so many rights that if it wasn't for the coronavirus, if they tried to say you must stay in, you must not come out, you must your parliament will be closed down, this would be a nightmare. If the only way it could happen would be if we got invaded by creatures from another planet, or from the Chinese rolled their tanks in and told us what to do, or the Russians, that they rolled their tanks in and told us what to do. And I certainly think the people in Britain and the people in America have ultimately object to what's going on. The only reason they justify it is they say, oh, the scientists and the experts said we had to do it, and so anyone who argued with them would have to be an idiot. But my argument is, no, they could be an expert who just disagrees, because they've put extra information into that scientific mathematical model, and they've come out with a bigger picture, a better picture, an evolved picture, a more thorough picture, a more careful and considerate picture of how the epidemic in the case of COVID-19 actually is. Because what they didn't consider when they presented these flattening of the curve models to you was the idea that this would be a completely harmless disease to children and young people, but a deadly disease to the very old people, and everyone in between on a slope of deadliness. So because so many of the people we have controlling policy in this country are people who are very often, they're over 70, 80 years old, because they taught the people who are running the country what to do. They had not ever prepared for every eventuality. They said, you know, we can always plug that extra information into the computer model that we've helped build, that we've helped fund, that we've agreed needs to be built and made and studied. In the same way, they said, we've prepared vast stocks of PPE equipment just in case, and fair enough to them, they did. So here's one last look at that. Okay. So the question is lockdown or isolate immunocompromised. We should be able to have a vote on it. We should be able to have a debate in Parliament on it. There should be someone in Parliament willing to ask stern questions of Boris. Now, when he was in Parliament, he asked stern questions, some questions that people didn't believe could even be asked. But I want somebody to say we need to have Parliament back and we need to have Prime Minister's questions back. And I need to ask this question because I don't know the answer. And I want to know if this guy's right. Because, you know, I'm convinced I am. Absolutely convinced. Economically, and for one thing, people's businesses, people's small businesses, but also the future of our children. And what I didn't fully explain then is that when you've got these spike proteins and this ACE2, and that your antibodies come in between, and they bind at different places on the spike, and interfere with this reaction. Okay. If you have a vaccination, you might get antibodies, but there's no guarantee they'll block. Your immune system might say, it might be a bit like, you know, if you went out into the street with a tin of cat food, you might get hundreds of cats come to eat it, but not if they've got no access to the street. You see, they won't come and eat it, so you'll never find them. So it's a little bit the same. If you just inject antigen, spike antigen, you might not get the antibodies you need. But if you infect somebody with a non-deadly virus, then what the immune system says is, if my patient's getting sick, I'm going to have to keep changing my ideas until I get something that works, and I can't stick with something that works. So in the end, instead of just getting, if you like, a bunch of cells which recognize the antigen that you've injected, that dominate the response, you see, these cells might dominate the response. And if you can ask any expert, I suggest you ask David Gray as an expert. He will probably tell you that yes, sometimes when you inject antigen, you get a dominant response towards certain epitopes of that protein, whether it's a spike protein or a capsid protein or whatever it might be. So we don't know why that is, but we also know that if you have an infection, we know for a fact that those children are producing, almost for a fact, almost certainly, I mean, it is a little bit of guesswork, but I think we'd find that children and young adults who've been asymptomatic, any asymptomatics, they will be producing antibodies that block. But they've had the disease, they've had the virus, the full growing, potentially lethal virus, and they've survived it without blinking an eye. And yet because important old people are dying, we're going to risk collapsing the economy forever. At some point, they've got to take their foot off the gas pedal or the brake pedal, whatever it is, off the brake pedal and allow a bit more gas into the economy. And you know, I suppose we've got Sweden and Brazil are already saying no to lockdown. And they're the only countries that are really protecting these civil liberties as well as potentially protecting people's businesses. It's tough decisions, as I've said. Soldiers on the battlefield sometimes have to decide who lives and dies. Can't carry everyone back to the nurse or whatever it is. So, you know, what can you do? It's a tough one. I don't pretend that there are any easy answers, and I don't pretend that what we're doing won't, to some extent, have good effects. But what I'm worried about is the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario, we have to be prepared for the worst case scenario, which says not only are we crashing the economy, but we're risking the future health of our children. And, you know, they might have to have vaccine after vaccine given to them and none of them be working. And meanwhile, the virus is getting perhaps nastier. So I agree that having seen the mutation rate and seeing it's not as bad as flu, it's about 4 times less bad as flu, but there's still enormous numbers of mutations on that spike protein that are going to mean that some of those viruses will leak through any vaccination program. I can pretty much guarantee it. I mean, it's like there's no experts on this thing. You know, that's the problem. The experts we've got, nobody knows it all, and there's a real danger in believing that the idea that there's nothing to worry about with this virus for you and your children. It depends how it's handled by the politicians. If they don't allow your children protection, then you might be disappointed with the vaccines when they finally come along, I can tell you.